Welcome. For today's webinar, we get to talk about what I will say is America's favorite four-letter word, taxes. But before we do that, let's go through kind of the basics and the essentials of our disclosures. My name is Don Lueke. I'm with Heritage First. We are a financial planning firm. And we like to package everything together for you with a clear understanding of what planning looks like. Today's planning is about taxes. I am not a CPA or a tax preparer, but I know a whole lot about this topic, and I think it will be very helpful for you to see how it works in your plan. Before we get started, I'd like to share some information about kind of a very notable speaker in our space, Ed Slott. Taxes will be the single biggest factor that will separate people from their retirement plans. And I think this is really, really important. We work super hard in our lifetimes saving money. We save, and that's important. But at some point, we need to recognize that what you save is not as important as how much you keep. So let's talk about how much we get to keep. And if you think about that in terms of taxation, let's go back to yesteryear, what taxes used to look like. You know, when they first started, this was the tax form. How simple is that? I mean, there's a couple lines on there, not very complicated. And around, you know, if you take away the Civil War, where we kind of raised taxes just to help fund the war, let's look and see where we really started the tax laws. It was around 1913. As you can see, 27 pages in our tax code. That's not a lot. If you look at fast forward to today, we have over 6,000 pages in our tax code. Now, if I stood up all those pages, it'd probably be taller than me. So it's complicated. And it wasn't always 6,000 pages. If you just go back a couple years, you can see that 1,600 pages were brought about in 2023. That's a lot. And when it's a lot, it's really, really complicated. How are we supposed to know how to make the best of our tax codes when there's 6,000 pages and you throw in 1,600 just a couple years ago? And the reason we're bringing all this up, there's a context behind this. So let's think about this. Let's think about our country and the amount of revenue that we bring in every year. You know, we bring in almost $5 trillion of revenue, and that's a lot. This is the catch. We spend almost $7 trillion. So $5 trillion brought in, $7 trillion spent. So we deficit spend at almost $2 trillion a year. Now, that may not seem like a lot to many, but let's go back just a few years. I think post-COVID, we had 3 different stimulus rounds. In addition to the 3 stimulus rounds, we had an infrastructure bill where we had shovel-ready, I put air quotes around shovel-ready jobs that just weren't there. And not too long ago, we had an Inflation Reduction Act. Talk about an oxymoron. The Inflation Reduction Act, I would argue, was the cause of greater inflation. If you add up those stimulus packages plus these 2 bills, that's an extra $7 trillion that we've added to our deficit. Now, that's a lot of money. That's a big deal. So let's put that in terms of total. Last year, when we ended the year in 2025, we were $37 trillion, almost $38 trillion in debt. And I think the challenge we have sometimes is we don't really see how big that number is, $1 trillion. And here's 37 trillion. Well, let's put this in context of time. If you were in front of me and I could ask you a question verbally, how many years is 1 trillion seconds? Your first guess might be, 50, 150 years. It's over 31,000 years. So that's how big 1 trillion seconds is. That's how big 1 trillion is. And we're $37.6 trillion in debt at the end of the year last year. At the time that you're watching this, we're over $39 trillion. And so now hopefully we're kind of creating this case that we have this situation that we have to fix. Well, what makes it this way? Well, if you look at our money supply, and this is what you'll see happen, this is right around COVID, and you see this, here's our stimulus packages, here's our spending more money, and we're coming across here. And so you always talk about printing money. You know, we're not necessarily printing money like a printer. We're issuing more debt. And that's where you see that 37 trillion become 39 trillion. And forecasts are not great. It could be $50 trillion in the next 5 to 7 years. So we have to do something about it. We have to find a way to fund it. Well, there's different ways we can fund it. We can reduce future spending. Well, we've been deficit spending for a long time, and I don't know, the parties can't really make a decision and agree to anything, so I don't know that's going to happen. We can increase borrowing. We can look at the last slide and saw how the money supply goes higher. That would increase the borrowing. I like this idea. We can increase revenue with economic growth. I think that's what we see trying to happen right now. Let's economy our way out of debt. Can we do that? I think the jury is out on that one. Or we can increase revenue with higher taxes. And so we don't know what it's going to look like. We're not sure exactly what the solution is going to be, but if you can look at our tax laws, we just passed a bill, the one big, beautiful bill, where what we saw was we saw an increase in our standard deduction. We've extended the tax cuts. We've increased SALT, that's state and local taxes. We have no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and we have Trump accounts. So everything that we're showing you here is a way to keep taxes lower and to extend that. So this is the economy our way out of debt. Is that possible? I hope so. I really do hope so, but it's not necessarily the surefire way out. So we have to kind of take a step back, and let's be smart with the planning here, and let's think about if this doesn't work, what's next? Well, if you think about how we've been trained and how we've been raised, we save, and we defer. We defer our taxes. And I think there's a myth that if you could defer your taxes, you'll be in a lower tax rate in retirement. There's no guarantees that that's going to be the case. And if you look historically at the tax rates, let's take a peek. If you can see back, when the taxes first started, I think 7% was the max. We talk about the top marginal tax rates. It was 7%. You had the war, and that went away. You had World War II, and it stayed up there. You had the Great Depression. You had all Social Security. You had all these entitlement programs that were coming out, and that's were needed, so taxes stayed high. And then we started to come down a little bit, and then we find ourselves, if you can see here, at probably the lowest marginal tax rate. This is the highest level that we've seen in our lifetimes. And if I could take a line and draw it right through here, this is the average. So it's not unreasonable, at least in our mind, to think that you might see a migration towards the average tax rate. We're not asking about anything significant, but an average tax rate if we can't economy our way out of that. And so the question is, what can we do to help preserve our retirement savings? Let's take a look at that. We have retirement savings. We have growth funds. This might be your stocks, your mutual funds, your ETFs. We want to grow. Preservation. We want safety in our investments. Mutual funds are not in this part necessarily. They're going to be up here. This would be things like CDs, money markets, checking, savings, annuities might be down through here. And we want liquidity. Liquidity means I want my access to my cash. Liquidity can be in the form of income, or it could just be withdrawals of convenience. Now, what we need to do when we put these plans together is they need to communicate with one another. And your risk is going to define a lot of that. How much risk are you willing to take? If I want to be in growth, I want to compare my growth with my preservation. Okay, because if I want more risk, I can amp up, I can add more to the risk investments, things like the mutual funds, the ETFs, we can buy stocks. And then after I compare my growth with my preservation, I can compare my growth to my liquidity. How much access to cash do I really need? Do I need an income? Am I going to buy a home soon? Am I going to buy a car? Am I going to take a family trip? So let's have growth communicate with liquidity. And then, of course, we need liquidity to communicate with preservation. And so if you look at all these, there's going to be a connectivity of these different types of investment accounts. And eventually, what we need to find out is how do we balance all of them together? So if safety is important, preservation, we might be giving up a little bit of growth, maybe some liquidity, but we want to go more towards preservation. So let's take a quick step and look at that. Let's say you have a bank CD, and you have $100,000 in the CD, and it earns 2%. Okay, so you'll make $2,000 that year. Does that fit your plan? And some people it does. Some people it will not. But what you need to be aware of is that if you are in retirement age and you're taking Social Security, there's a thing called provisional income that we need to watch for. And if we make too much money, our Social Security, we're going to pay tax. In fact, up to 85% of your Social Security can be taxed. This is not going to drive our plan, but we need to be aware of it. And so how we connect all these pieces and we create that awareness is we have an understanding of what are the different investment types that are out there. Not necessarily stocks, bonds, mutual funds, but how are they taxed? And so if we can look at three separate buckets. We have a tax-deferred bucket, we have a taxable bucket, and we have a tax-free bucket. Tax-deferred. This is where we were trained. This is your 401k, it's your IRA, it's your 457s, your 403bs. It's all the accounts where you put money in and you save it and you defer taxation until you take it out. And then we have our taxable bucket. This is going to be your money markets, your CDs, your bank accounts. It could be a brokerage account where you have stocks, bonds, mutual funds, but they're taxable. You get a 1099 every year for accounts that you have in the taxable bucket. And then we have, at this end, we have tax-free. Now there's only a handful of investments that have fit in the tax-free, and primarily we're going to think about Roth IRAs or some life insurance that has cash value with the intent to take withdrawals from the cash value. So tax-deferred. Again, this is where we were trained. We were trained to fill this bucket up as much as possible. And the challenge that we're going to run, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but there can be a better thing, is that when we end up in retirement, this bucket is the biggest bucket. We're going to have what we call a tax time bomb, if you will, a tax torpedo. There's lots of different names that we have referred to the tax-deferred account being too large. And then the next size bucket is going to be the taxable bucket. So whenever we filled up that tax-deferred bucket, we started filling up our taxable bucket. And so these two would often communicate. And in our back of our mind, we're always thinking, okay, that's for the future, this is for now. And that's smart. That was the way to do it. And then we have at the end, it's the smallest bucket, and it's the tax-free bucket. And so if I could just ask you to do take a mental model change. I'm going to change your paradigm. And if this is a 0% tax, we take money out of this bucket. If you've done all the rules and followed the right way, this money is tax-free. And so this money is taxable. So how do we get money from here to here? That's our goal. That's the goal today in retirement planning when you're thinking about taxation, is I'm going to move from this bucket to this bucket. Now, to get from there to here is a taxable event. A lot of times we hear about Roth conversions. This is a good time to talk about Roth conversions. And Roth conversion is taking my money out of here and getting it here. And if this bucket's big enough, this bucket's going to help pay the tax to get it to here. Because I need this bucket to look like that bucket when I go into retirement. This bucket's going to create a large tax liability for me. And think about this. Think about if when you do take money out of this larger bucket and you pay tax on it and you're married filed jointly. One of you is going to die first. And that big bucket is going to be for a single filer. So you're going to have a tax increase. And we'll hit that here in a little bit. So all these things are going on in the back of your mind. But the main goal is to go from here to here and have this help pay for it. So I'm going to go back a few years, and maybe some of you have seen this toy. It's called a Slinky. Everybody's played with the Slinky. I remember watching it go down the steps. It never worked for me like it did on TV. The commercial, it worked perfectly. You went every step. I remember trying it over and over and over again, and it never worked. But anyway, I'm going to use it for an example here. If you had a Slinky in your hand, the markets go up and the markets go down. So if we are in the mindset of doing a Roth conversion, let's think about doing a Roth conversion ideally when it is down. And because if we do that, this minimizes the tax. Remember, it's going to be a taxable event. If we see an opportunity to convert some of our investments while it's down, that allows us to be able to watch the market go up, and now this bucket is tax-free. And so the idea behind that is convert when it's low and then cash out when it's high. I'm going to use a different analogy here. Would you rather pay tax on the seed or the harvest? This is the harvest. And if you set it up the right way, you're creating an opportunity of tax-free income through retirement. I can't stress this enough. And we talked about as a surviving spouse. You might go from a 12% bracket to a 22% bracket, or 24, or even worse, if taxes go higher, a 32% bracket. You're going to see a significant increase in your tax liability by hanging out in those tax-deferred buckets. So let's really focus on and create a plan, the Slinky plan, if you will, to go from tax-deferred to tax-free. And if that doesn't convince you, and if it's important to you, think about when your kids inherit the IRAs. When your children, the actual IRA, the tax-deferred IRA, is the least efficient asset to pass to the next generation. If you can get it into an environment like the tax-free with the Roth, that is exponentially greater for your kids because they can inherit that, let it sit for 10 more years, and take a lump sum of cash, tax-free. That is super significant. So be aware of the taxation for a surviving spouse and the benefits for your kids, but let's don't forget the fact that we're planning for you too, and having tax-free income in retirement is a better way to go. So that's an example, was doing Roth conversions. When we're talking about taxes, think about maybe some other ways that we can do that. There's a thing called a qualified charitable distribution. Now this applies if you're over 70 and a half. And if you're over 70 and a half, you have your tax deferred account. Remember, we haven't converted everything yet. So you have an IRA, it's tax deferred, and you have a favorite charity. Maybe it's your church, maybe it's just an organization that you've grown up appreciative of. It could be anything. It has to be a viable 501c3. If you can contact your custodian and have the custodian write the check to the nonprofit. So why do we do that? By doing that, they receive full value. The check doesn't even come to you. It's not even recognized as income for you, but you make a gift. So it is a way to make a charitable contribution without recognizing income first. This is the exciting part if you're over 73 and your required minimum distribution age. That distribution also counts as your required minimum distribution. So let's look at this a little stronger. You can go up to $111,000 per year. You can make a charitable contribution, and you don't increase your taxable income. That's a pretty good deal for those that are charitably inclined. One more example, and then we'll get into a case study, is donor-advised funds. So with the new tax law, we have some limitations on how much we can deduct because the standard deduction has been made so much greater. So, and if you think about how we used to give, maybe you gave $10,000 a year in year one, in year two, in year three, and you never were able to deduct that with the new tax law. Well, if you took $30,000 instead and put it into a donor-advised fund, that allows you to take a significant deduction in the year you make the fund, and here is a pool of money that you can use for giving for the rest of your life, as long as that money is filled up. Now, I'd like this also, if you have a significant capital gain in a year, is to share that capital gain with your donor-advised fund. If it's important to you and you want to involve family I think teaching families about philanthropy is very, very important. This is a great tool for that. You put money into a donor-advised fund, call it the name of your family, the Miller Family Fund, whatever your last name is, and you sit down with your kids and you say, okay, we're going to give away $5,000 this year. Who do we give it to and why? You get very meaningful conversations with your family, all the while taking a taxable event and creating a tax deduction. Very meaningful, very powerful to include your family with that. Okay, so we talked about Roth conversions, qualified charitable distributions, and donor-advised funds. We work with our clients in a whole other layer of investment and tax strategies. These are just three big ones that I want to share with you. But now let's go into a little case study. Let's look at Bob and Mary. They have Social Security income, and Bob's is $30,000, Mary's is $15,000. You can see here that he has a pension. Very, very lucky to have a pension today, isn't it? And so it's nice that he has one. He also has a required minimum distribution. It's that IRA, it's that tax-deferred bucket that grew and grew and grew, and he now needs to take money out every year. So their income is around $95,000. They have a standard deduction, and they have then a taxable income of $41,000. So they're in the 12% tax bracket. We have no control over what the tax bracket is. We have absolutely none, but we have total control of how our money is received and into which tax bracket that will go. So their tax is around $4,400. Now keep in mind, our tax system is progressive. Doesn't mean every dollar was taxed at 12%. It just means a portion of it was. Some of it was taxed at 10%. And so I'm going to run through a scenario with Bob and Mary, and you saw that their tax was $4,400. Sadly, though, Bob passes away, so we lose one of our Social Security functions. We lose Mary's because she's going to step up to Bob's. His was greater than. So we cross out the $15,000. When Bob first took his pension, he agreed to take less money so that there would be a survivorship benefit, which is a great gift to a surviving spouse. And so if you add up her Social Security now, which is $30,000, which was his, and still gets the pension, and she gets the IRA, so now the income is $80,000. Effectively, it's $15,000 less than what it was. This is important. Her deduction, it's less, isn't it? It was way over here. Now it's here because now we're filing single. The total taxable income is $51,000. So you're reading that right. Income went down, taxable income goes up. And that's just the way life works with this type of planning. The marginal rate now is 22%. So they went from 12% to 22%. So that's 10 on 12. That's almost a 50% increase. So you go from $4,400 of tax to $6,000 in tax. I think that's an important thing just to look at. Now, let's extrapolate that. If your income is greater than this, these numbers get a lot bigger, don't they? In fact, we work with a lot of folks, by the time when we find them, this might be 32 because this number, this RMD got so big. And we can control those things. There are things along here that we could have done a while ago to not have to get this tax increase. Let's say 2029, the way the tax laws work, the standard deduction is going to go down. We have, for a period of time, for seniors, we have an extended or an additional standard deduction. And when that all goes away, her tax now is $7,400. So let's think about those things. Traditional IRA, in 12 years, it grows to $500,000. And so the total RMDs in their lifetime is going to be $596,000. And you take a tax on that at $71,000. They don't spend it all, and so some of it's going to be inherited. Now, this is the challenge, because when our children inherit our money, they probably already have a job, and they make a good amount of wage. When they receive, we call this income in the receipt of a decedent. So our system is progressive, so their inheritance just stacks on top of their existing income. And oftentimes we can find ourselves in the 32% bracket just by inheriting an IRA. I said it earlier, it's worth repeating. IRAs are probably the least efficient asset to pass to the next generation. And so they'll pay $152,000 in tax. So now, we always talk about, so what do we do about it? Let's slide that over here, and let's think about if they were to come into my office at around age 60, knowing that they had $250,000 in their 401ks or IRAs, and we know it's going to grow. Why don't we create a plan that says, let's pay tax at 12% because we have room in that bracket. Our income allowed us to convert some of our IRA to a Roth IRA. And so we did $30,000 a year. We call that bracket bumping. I'm going to bump you up to the next tax bracket, but not into it, just below it. So if we could have done a conversion for $30,000 a year. We pay that extra $3,600 in tax. What we've created is a Roth IRA over that 30-year period of time, by age 90, $1.4 million. This assumes a 6% growth rate. And when the children inherit $1.4 million, look at that, zero income tax versus $152,000, and not even a number as big. So we could stay on this page, but the point, and it's super important to understand the power of, number one, compounding, and the power, number two, of minimizing tax over a lifetime. The name of our webinar is Taxation and Taxes. And so these are things that we want to address while you're living, and we want to address it when ultimately it gets inherited by your kids. And it's not done by just focusing on let's grow our money. It's done by the fact that we get to do a comprehensive plan where we talk about tax planning strategies. Is legacy important to you? If it's not important to you, don't worry about it. Keep paying the taxes. If it's important to you, let's find a way to not. And everything has to communicate. Our tax plan has to communicate with our legacy and estate plan. Our tax plan has to communicate with our income plan. Our tax plan needs to communicate with our investment plan. We talk about those buckets: tax deferred, taxable, and tax free. This needs to communicate with all of those. We haven't talked about healthcare. That's for another webinar. But tax is what's driving all of these. So as we're focused on all of these, we need to focus on how to make them all communicate and how to make them all work together. And so that's it. That's taxation. That's the four-letter word that I think we have total control over. Again, we can't control the tax brackets, but you have absolute control over how your money will be taxed and how to layer them to build the largest nest egg that you could possibly have. And you can control the taxation on it, both as a survivor, but also as a beneficiary.